Hey team, welcome back to another episode of the Strength Game Podcast. I'm your host, Nick O'Brien, and this is episode number 33. The Strength Game is a weekly podcast dedicated to discussing all things physical culture with the coaches, athletes, iron enthusiasts, and experts deeply embedded in the strength game on both sides of the profession, both as coaches and as competitive athletes. I want to thank everyone who has liked, shared, and commented. Your support allows us to continue to bring on expert guests and highlight more individuals in the strength game, just like our guests today. Also want to thank our sponsor, Cerberus Strength. Trusted since 2012, Cerberus is making the best strongman, powerlifting, and strength sports equipment and accessories, ensuring the ultimate competitive edge. Every one of their products is tried, tested, and proven by top-level athletes worldwide. Whether it's competing on the big stage at World's Strongest Man or training at home in the gym, Cerberus Strength equipment is reliable, durable, and of course, strong enough to handle all your training goals and needs. So if you're in the market for the highest quality strength and conditioning gear and equipment, be sure to check out CerberusStrength.com and use our promo code strength_game to save on your next order. That's strength_game. And in this week's episode, I'm excited. I am joined by a former colleague of mine, good friend, Adam Yetter. Yetter is an assistant athletic trainer now at Boise State University, where in his current role, he provides day-to-day care for the men's basketball program. Prior to joining the Broncos, Yetter spent 2 years at Fresno State as an intern and then promoted to a graduate assistant. While at Fresno State, he primarily worked with the women's lacrosse program and assisted with football training camps. He's also spent time while obtaining his undergraduate degree in athletic training at Ohio State, working with a variety of Buckeye teams, high schools, as well as summer camps. Yetter continues to stay active in his spare time, playing rec ice hockey, lifting, golfing, and backpacking. Like I said, I'm excited to have the show today, joined again. So with all that said, let's get in the game with Adam Yetter. What's going on, everybody? I am excited today. I'm joined by one of my former colleagues, good buddy of mine, Adam Yetter. What's going on, dude?
Hey, Nick, it's good. Always good talking with you. Thanks for that intro. Makes me feel like, I've done something with my life.
Hey, man. I mean, we worked together for a while, and it's always good to catch up and talk to you. And it's weird seeing you in different colors now, but it's kind of the way of the business, and where I guess you stole a few other people over at Boise too.
It's kind of crazy. I mean, even, I don't know, it's within the conference, and it just kind of makes sense sometimes for a lot of people come on over here, and yeah, I'm enjoying it.
Hey, that's kind of the way this beast works. So I'm happy for you to be out there, but I don't like when we play each other. That's for sure.
Depends on the sport. You guys had a pretty good year for softball for sure.
Oh, true. Yeah. Well, we'll take that. Unfortunately, we didn't get to ever play baseball against each other. Now with Boise baseball being a one and done.
Unfortunate. And think about all those kids that, it's just tough. A lot of them are playing still, which is good, and a couple of them are staying here on scholarship. So I mean, across the country, you hear programs getting cut, positions getting cut. It's been a tough. How long has it been now? 14 months. The whole country really. So.
I know. It feels like a lot longer.
Yeah, it feels like a lot longer.
Hey, so I want to get right into it. I want to kind of talk about how you actually got into the strength game, what was your kind of introduction to training, kind of the sports you played growing up, kind of leading to what you currently do to stay active and train. I know you do a lot of things when you can find the time, especially up in the mountains now. So what kind of originally got you started, and what are you starting to do now in your free time nowadays?
Yes, I guess I should say, for all the strength coaches listening, I'm not a strength coach. I don't compete. I hit a couple PRs this year. I benched 225 for the first time ever, and I set a hang snatch PR of 95 pounds this week. So that's where I'm at in my training. But I got into it really. I mean, I grew up playing roller hockey and tennis and t-ball and soccer like every other kid, I stuck with hockey, played ice hockey in high school and tennis in high school. Didn't play past that. I was about ready to do something different and new and go to college, and didn't play club, didn't do anything. I basically knew I wanted to study athletic training and be an athletic trainer. And what kind of introduced me was, I mean, it's kind of corny, but literally one day I was watching the NFL and I saw somebody got hurt, somebody ran on the field and helped them. And I was like, that's seems kind of cool. I was probably, I don't know, 12. I kind of forgot about it. And I had a family friend who I'm still close with today, Doug Kretzinger. It'd be awesome if somebody recognized that name. Please reach out. He worked in Western Texas for a long time, worked with U.S. handball, went to Russia in the Olympics. He kind of mentored me as a family friend. It just happened to be his wife played tennis with my mom. And so he kind of reminded me of that a little bit. And then my high school anatomy teacher, his brother-in-law was the athletic trainer at the high school. And so I shadowed a collegiate Taekwondo tournament with a bunch of athletic trainers that were covering it at the Olympic Training Center in Colorado Springs. It was awesome. Like I didn't know anything about Taekwondo. I knew it was a martial art, but we had people kicking each other in the head and like spraining knees. And it was some serious stuff. Then it was like, okay, I'm doing this for sure. So I always stayed active, and then went to school in Ohio. And really, it was kind of my roommates that one of them competed in powerlifting a little bit, and the other one had an interest as well. So we'd all kind of train together, and I started learning a little bit more about like Jim Wendler and what's the West Side Barbell, right? I never visited, right? But it's down the street. Like Columbus is kind of a hot spot for powerlifting. I met JL Holdsworth. I remember you mentioned him and the spot. He probably doesn't remember me, but he's got, he's pretty well known, and Elite FTS is down there. So it's kind of a hot spot. So you just kind of happen to meet people that compete, and I never did, but it's an interest for me and that style of training. So it's definitely bled over at least a little bit into what I do as an athletic trainer. And I feel like I'm very comfortable in the weight room, which is definitely an advantage for me.
No, that's awesome. I know that Columbus area is always popping. I mean, it kind of bleeds over from West Side and all the guys like Elite FTS and JL too. Everything's over there. I mean, Windler's in a secret spot too, back over there.
And Rogue is there too. They just put a huge factory in. And the headquarters is there. I think they sponsor a CrossFit event or two, and there's a bunch of CrossFit boxes. Like there's some serious fitness athletes out of Columbus.
Oh, no doubt. Arnold's there. I mean, the Arnold Classic, St. Louis area is pretty big as well too. So, I mean, that Midwest area has been blowing up, and what is that? Powerlift is, I think, in the Chicago area too. So, I mean, within like a 2-hour drive, you can hit a lot of places. So it's a big spot, but it's cool to kind of see like how your roommates and everything, and like still getting involved in training, and then kind of bled over into athletic training and kind of, I mean, originally got you started. That was, I mean, like that's what I originally went to school for, was athletic training, like very, very briefly. Like I want to say one day, until I kind of realized that there was another thing, like the dungeon of strength conditioning that I could do. But I think that's why we ended up working real well together, because I think we both were real comfortable going into each other's kind of like domain and learning from the other one, so we could kind of like bridge the gap between the two. So kind of before we get into that, because that's one of the big things I wanted to talk with you about, like the relationship that like both departments have, because I know you and myself, I think we had a good relationship between us. Like going into your time in Columbus, like what has kind of led you to your career now at Boise State? Can you give a little synopsis of like your athletic training background now?
Yeah, so I went to Ohio State, and it's had it's not the program of athletic training isn't as old as some, especially since the credentialing sort of started. I can't tell you the time, but like Ohio University has been around longer. I think Iowa's been around even longer. Oregon State's been around a long time. So Ohio State's relatively young, but it has a lot of alumni. It's a really good program. And I think that was one reason I thought that it would be good for me, is because it's a large network. And it's easy to say for us now, it's all about who you know or who knows you. But back then I kind of had to let people tell me that a little bit. Like, you just don't know as a student or as a high schooler what's going to be good. But I don't know if somebody was in my ear or if I had somehow come to that to myself, but the network of how many people there were in the country was attractive to me, and be able to put it on my resume and hopefully have an extra connection or say, hey, give that person a call, was one big reason, which is exactly how I got my first internship out of undergrad, was in Fresno. There was Will Turner, went to Oregon State, knew people in Fresno. And then we had, right before me, there was, or not right before, 2 years before me, there was a graduate of Fresno State, was an intern at Ohio State. Then a graduate of Ohio State right ahead of me was an intern in Fresno. So it's just like started building this pipeline, and it still is there. There's a student that graduated last spring that is there now. So we've built kind of a good connection across the country, both directions. And so that's really what got me started. So I was there as an intern first, rolled over into a graduate assistant position. And in the same way, my roommate in Fresno got a job at Boise State as a full-time with softball, permanent full-time athletic trainer with softball. And then this basketball job came open, and she was kind enough to put my name in. And I think a couple other people might've said, not for them. And that's how it got down to my name. But it was kind of quick. It was a sudden turnaround. They needed somebody right away. And I got extremely lucky that I could finish my degree in Fresno. I have to drop Dr. John McMillan's name. I don't know if they'll ever hear it, but I have to thank him a lot. And Janelle Gilbert as well, Dr. Janelle Gilbert. So let me finish. And I can't say enough how lucky I am to have people that help me along the way. And I like to think that I earned some of it too. So.
Yeah, no doubt. No, I'm glad it all worked out in the end. I mean, we had plenty of conversations about what to do, and I know it was different sports, it was different area and everything. And you did have a network, but at the same time, like sometimes that network just gets you to the place or get your name in the door. You still have to earn it in some way. And then you have to live with that decision and kind of actually prove it at that point. Because otherwise, especially for you, that was a temporary position. So, I mean, you earned the getting bumped up to a graduate position at Fresno, and then you went from temporary to full-time now at Boise. So I think you've done enough to earn your position and keep moving up the ranks, which is cool. Hey, so kind of getting into the meat and potatoes of everything, like talk about a little bit of like the sports performance, sports medicine relationship. I know we kind of mentioned that we had a pretty good relationship back and forth, like working within the same team and kind of working within what was happening in my domain in the weight room, what you were seeing on the field, and what was happening with rehab. What do you think athletic trainers and strength coaches can really do to kind of build a relationship between each other? Or what do you think was kind of successful with ours to kind of help bridge the gap between both our professions?
Well, I think one thing that I've come to realize is that it's not that different. Like the goal of what we're doing, and not necessarily, the whole program or anything, but in terms of taking an athlete or patient and taking them from here to farther down the road here, it takes the same things. It takes strength. It takes increasing, motor control, rate of force development, stability, all this stuff. It's the same things. It's just a matter of where you are on the spectrum starting. So if I have an injured athlete, yeah, they have a longer way to go, but a lot of the goals are still the same. You still accomplish it with progressive overload, with good programming, with good prescription of exercises, good selection of exercises. It's still the same thing. Now, there's a couple extra things. You start talking about medicine and some others, but if you keep it that simple, we're doing a very, very similar job. Now, I think that with that in mind, and I wouldn't say I came in and told you that we're doing the same job or any means, but I think how to build a better relationship is just time. Like spend time with them. I think one thing that I made a point of doing was just come into the weight room and just walk. Now, we were very lucky that the weight room is literally, we could have a conversation from the door of the athletic training room to the weight room. Very lucky. So just walk over there. I would sit on some plyo boxes and just watch and maybe look at some of the athletes that I was working with and see how they were moving, or look at the ones that were impressed. Like I wouldn't have expected to be such good lifters in the weight room, and kind of be pleasantly surprised and see what you're doing in terms of prescription and programming and how you're pairing exercises and just kind of getting a feel. Because that was my first introduction to team lifts. So as a student, we didn't have any involvement in the weight room. We, from what I recall, we would send, like, I spent the most time with softball. We would send their modifications with the athletes. So, hey, make sure you tell Coach, Andy Britton, Coach Andy Britton, make sure you tell him that we need to do this. And that was, a couple months. I don't know the full story, but being in there, seeing what you're doing, seeing what they're doing with each other was I think the best way to do that. And
yeah.
Go ahead.
No, I was going to say, I completely agree. That's my one of my least favorite things is athletic training, adding like a note kind of over to an athlete and be like, here you go, make sure you pass this on to the strength coach, like right before we start. And yeah, for those that don't know, like having our both like professions, like both like where we're housed, the weight room and the athletic training room side by side, it definitely made our job a lot easier to communicate. And I think going over to see how you were doing rehab, how recoveries were going, and like what the general consensus was from the rehab side and the recovery side in like your domain, it definitely helped what I was doing. Cause then we weren't double down on like what we were doing in terms of like any preventative stuff or recovery, because we both had an open line of communications of what we were doing. And it kind of made, like you said, on the spectrum a lot more simple, where we could be efficient with our time with the athletes and not necessarily like be stuck doing the same thing, like back and forth all the time, which I thought was what made it really successful for sure.
Yeah. And I think a good example is like, if I had an athlete that I was taking through, like starting a plyometric progression or starting something, and I knew that you were already doing that stuff in the weight room and I knew exactly what you were programming, I'd look at it right before, and if we had to modify it, we could, but we don't double up. We're not doing extra. We're not doing more than we should, and it's still accurate, progressive. It fits what they need the same way. You're not doubling up. It's just good communication and knowing what's going to happen ahead of time.
Yeah, for sure. Aside from like actually going in to like observe, like athletic trainers going into like the weight room to observe sessions, or strength coaches going into the athletic training room to like just sit down and get a consensus of what's going on, what actually maybe like some more intensive rehabs look like, or what a typical recovery session looks like in there. What are kind of some better ways, or maybe other ways that you can actually, strength coaches can gain a better understanding of what athletic training is doing, and then maybe like what athletic trainers could do to kind of like see what the strength side is? Like, is it train, like, do they need to train themselves, or do they need to actually like get involved and like kind of play pickup or figure out the sport themselves and like some of those movements? Like, what would you suggest?
I think it's asking questions, even if it's a question that's pretty simple. Hey, how's such and such looking? Hey, was this person, did they show up today? Did you see like just simple questions that'll open a conversation. And I think, I'm just one person. I don't want to speak for anybody else, but I think sometimes there is sort of this impression that athletic trainers have on strength coaches that it's all about putting up more numbers. It's all about getting bigger. It's all about getting the bar up no matter what. And it's not, that is true, but it's not the case for everyone. And you don't know that until you also ask questions. So, hey, what's your program looking like? Hey, what's the next card? What's looking on the next card? How are you, just asking questions. I think that's a good place to start. I think, like I said, it opens conversation. It doesn't have to be spending an hour in the weight room watching your team train, because that might, seem like you're wasting time, or like, what, they have this handle. I don't want to look like I'm babysitting them because this strength coach got it handled. But if you build a relationship and you're able to be in there, ask questions, know what they're doing. Sometimes too, and kind of talking about my background where I do like to train, I like lifting, and I would jump on the card that you would write for the team. So that way, one, I don't have to program something for myself. Two, it's like, I know what they're going through, so when they say, oh, it's my back's kind of bothering me a little bit. It's like, oh, was it on the the RDL or was it on the reverse hyper? Like, because you know what it is and you can feel it too. So the other thing too that's helpful is if you kind of go through that program, if you're interested, if you have somebody that you're working on something specific with, like, hey, in the weight room, when you start doing this exercise, think about this. We're doing the same thing. So think about this. Think about, your posterior chain. Think about your anterior, lock down your core the same way we're doing it right here, and it'll carry over a lot faster.
No, that's a great point. I mean, I think it was cool that you actually like came through and you did a lot of the lifts, and a lot of the movements and everything we were going to do is similar no matter what. And by me going in or you coming in, there was definitely a bunch of coaching cues or movement like executions that I picked up from you. And then the same with some of your rehabs. Like when you took it down and you were doing some regressions with athletes, then I could kind of find ways to change the program around for someone that was either at a lower level or someone that kind of needed advanced treatments. So it was definitely a way for us to kind of individualize the program. And then also like talking about just having conversations with each other. Like a lot of times I'm not able to go to all the practices. You can go all the practices as an athletic trainer. So the same as you coming in to see how they're moving in the weight room, you can kind of piece things together with how they're moving on the field and see where there's a lot of transferability of movement, execution, strength, compensation patterns, anything like that. And then those can be other conversations, because I think at the end of the day, we're looking to try to mitigate and prevent injuries, both of us. And I think the more information I can pull from you, the more information you can provide to me, then as a strength coach, that helps me, because then I can better tailor my program and then hopefully make your job easier.
It's eyes and ears. People always say, both with strength coaches and athletic trainers, we're the eyes and ears, right? I mean, if it's administration saying it, if it's somebody's supervisor, like, hey, you guys are in the trenches every day looking at the athletes, you're the eyes and ears. And coaches, sport coaches say that too, right? You guys hear the stuff that we don't always hear, so you're the eyes and ears. So be that for each other too. Be the eyes at practice. Talk about, hey, how was practice? Oh, they really got beat down, or hey, it was pretty light, but they think it was beat. Like, and you can be, try to be objective about it and try to give some good info.
Yeah. And I think too, also like for strength coaches and athletic trainers, what they tell you is sometimes different than what they tell me. And maybe it's not necessarily just because like what my title is as strength coach and yours as athletic trainer. It might be just personalities too. So if it's two people with different personalities, you're painting a different picture from different athletes. And I think the more information you're able to collect together, the better product you can put on the table and better service you can give to the athletes by, again, like knowing a pulse of what's actually going on with the whole team all the time.
And when you bring that up, having a pulse, knowing how, what's going on with an individual, I can't provide all of that. If somebody wants to get their heart rate up, get a hard sweat in, I can kind of do that, but not in the same way that you can get it in the weight room. So when athletes, like, I kind of had to make this, I guess saying it now, I'm coming to the realization that I can't provide all that. And if somebody wants to go to the weight room to get something that I can't provide them, like, that's where they should go. That's where they should be. And it's great when, like, take an example where somebody is complaining to me something, such and such, and then he's telling me like, well, they're just in the weight room doing extra work. Like, oh, well, then it must not be that bad. Right? Like, if you're going to choose to do extra work, then you're probably not hurting that bad.
No, for sure. No, I like that, because it goes based off like what you said with the spectrum of things. So at some point, I'm going to have to pass athletes to you for something, and then at some point, you're going to pass them on to me. And I think not having an ego about where it is, and also like being able to kind of dip into each other's profession a little bit and at least have an understanding of what each of us are doing, definitely kind of helped make sure that no one fell through the cracks and nothing kind of slipped away. So like actually talking on the subject of like injury prevention, like how would you actually describe like injury prevention, and like how do you kind of take a practical approach with your team or with any teams you've worked in the past to kind of work with the coaching staff and other support staff members to like collectively work on those sort of things?
That's when you say how would you describe injury prevention, it's multifaceted. It's involves the training room. It involves, for me, the court, the weight room, but also lifestyle. It involves what kind of food they're eating or not eating, what kind of sleep. It's multifaceted. Um, I it's I'm thankful here, and I'm fortunate that our head coach doesn't run them into the ground, especially during the season. He makes sure they get off their feet. We don't go over 2 hours on the court doing stuff. He's very aware of how they feel might be how they play. And often I think that is the case. And if they've convinced themselves they don't feel good, they're not going to play well either. So I'm thankful that that's the case in terms of overuse injuries, and I don't have to fight a battle of, we're practicing really hard for 3 hours every day. They're just grinding them down. So I'm thankful for that. I think, to answer your question a little bit more directly, I think injury prevention is quality training, both in the weight room and for your sport. I think being calculated or detailed or specific, and having a plan and having a progression, both in the weight room and on the field, court, ice, whatever. I think those are the best ways. If you don't have an idea where it's going, you'll never have an end, or you won't go anywhere between your programming or between your sport. So I think really just the answer is quality training, and what that means. I think you can listen to the rest of your podcast probably about about what that means, but it's multifaceted as well. So there's a little bit of education too for the athletes themselves on how to take care of themselves, or hey, if you're doing this in the weight room, you probably don't want to go home and then take a long run, or hey, today's the day that we don't need to do extra work, or hey, we just had a tough flight home, 5-hour flight home, got delayed, whatever, like go home and sleep. Don't do extra work. Don't get in the gym. Just go home and sleep, because that's going to be better off for you. So there's some education too.
No, I completely agree. And I think that's one thing, especially with college athletes and then just kind of both of our roles where we're in. It's a lot of educational stuff and almost like mentoring, just to kind of come across to the athletes and have them understand that there are a lot of composing things that like actually add up to what stresses them out, what actually helps with peak performance, and then overall just health. And like you said, a lot of them travel, nutrition, practice times, lifting, all those things, and then being able to have a plan and a progression in place. Those things are huge, but at the end of the day, you have to have like an education piece to the athletes too, because like we're not going to be able to see them for more than 2, maybe 4 hours a day during certain points of the season. So what are they actually going to do during those other 20 hours, other 22 that you've got going on? So kind of on that same boat, like how do you actually go about approaching and building like buy-in with your athletes and like actually establishing a rapport? Because you can educate them all you want, and it can go in one ear and out the other if they don't actually trust you or know that you kind of have their best intentions in mind. So how is important for you to like establish a relationship with your athletes, especially kind of like taking your example where you came in midway through the season? Like what were some practical things that you actually did midway through a season, like just getting thrown in, that kind of helped? And then what would you normally do to kind of build rapport if this was like a normal season where you see a freshman for the first time?
I love that question, because I've been thinking about it a lot lately in the last year, for a couple different angles, I guess, and I'd like to kind of touch on them. So bringing up last year, I knew that was going to be a challenge, because when I was leaving Fresno State with women's cross team, and saying goodbye to everybody, and kind of realizing like how well I had gotten to know some of them, and a lot of the players, and their families and everything, I realized that I'm leaving all of that in terms of working. I still keep in touch with some, and I'm coming to a brand new team. I don't know a single name. That was, I knew it was going to be challenging. And I think one of the first things in terms of practicality was, one, learning everybody's name as soon as I can. Names, faces, as soon as I can. I encourage my students to do that. I encourage new staff members to do that. Learning somebody's name and remembering who they are goes a long ways. I mean, think about like, if you meet somebody somewhere and see them again a week later and they remember your name, like that's cool. So that was the number one, get everybody's name. And then two, for me, was to get the guys that were in the training room every day with they're a little banged up or had a more long-term recovery, some things they were still taking care of, maybe postseason surgeries because it was October. So maybe they're just coming off of things, figure out who they are, figure out what they've been doing that works, and keep doing that as best as I can. Because I don't need to come in and change something if it's going really well. I can provide a new perspective on things, maybe if it's not going that well or something else to kind of try, or it's a good opportunity to do that. But if it's not broken, don't fix it, right? So keep doing what's working. In terms of buy-in, I've been thinking a lot about pro sports and how, like, just this week or maybe 2 weeks ago, Jack Eichel of the Buffalo Sabres, I think he had a herniated disc in his back, cerebral disc, and he was basically came out to the media and said the team's not letting me do what I want and getting surgery. I don't know the full details, but like that's a tough situation to be in my role, and it's pro sports. I know it's different, but automatically they know you're getting paid from the team, and the athlete knows that you might not have their best interest truly at heart. And again, this is in pros, but some of that stuff's starting to trickle down into college athletics, especially for the revenue generating sports or the sports where they have a future playing or competing after, whether it be internationally or in some other capacity. They might still be thinking, hey, you're getting paid by the university for the product on the field that I can provide. So that's been in my head a little bit, and maybe that's not the right way to think about it. But it's just interesting to me, and to see, like, that's pro sports, and I'm starting to see some of it trickle down. And what's another interesting thing for me is I work with a lot of black guys. It's men's basketball. I'm a white male that worked with a lot of white females in lacrosse, and that was new for me too. And I knew that as well. I'd worked with football but not having hard conversations, not talking a lot about family and their backgrounds, and having the difficulty stuff, the difficult parts of my job I'd never had to do. And so now getting buy-in with guys that don't look like me, that are have had different different experiences growing up than me has been difficult as well. And I kind of expected that, but now over this whole last year, with lots of pushing towards social equality and social justice and Black Lives Matter and all that stuff, it's been good for me, and I've kind of tried to take advantage of it and learn and listen. And so I try to have a little bit more of those conversations and understand, like, I was hoping that they might not treat me different because I'm a white guy, but I think I just have to acknowledge it. Like, I am different. It's okay that we're different, but don't not say anything about it. It's not something to just, I don't know. It's there. You have to acknowledge that it exists. And I think that's where I'm at right now. I don't know where to go from here, but
no, those are good points. No, those are definitely things I didn't really think about. Obviously, since you were taking the position, those weren't always like the things in my forefront that I was thinking for you when you actually like accepted and started moving on. My big thing was just like, all right, well, he's working with a different team, a different location, getting thrown in the middle of the year. Those are definitely two very different demographics, male to female, like very different sports in their regard, very different areas of the country too, even though we're in the same conference. So those are a lot of varying things that you had to kind of learn, especially on the fly. So my hat's off to you for like having to go through all that stuff. But kind of on that same subject with actually building rapport, because I'm sure those were a lot of stressful things too. And I know that, unfortunate part of your job is dealing with a lot of people that have to go through surgeries or long-term injuries, some chronic ones, or even like some serious acute ones too. Especially like within that time, you don't have to disclose anybody that had like injuries at that point in time. But since you didn't have a lot of buy-in and rapport initially, like how did you even like try to speed that process up with anybody that like you were seeing on a daily basis for potentially a surgical procedure or something where they're like more intimately involved with you for rehab 3-4 times a day, every single day of the week. Like, how do you build trust with those ones that are honestly like might go to the NBA or trusting you with their arm, their leg, their limb, like their career in life when you like are just learning their names? Like, how did you kind of go about that as well?
Yeah, I think one, I had a lot of help. It wasn't just me. I'm not here in a silo by myself. My supervisor has been great. My coworkers here have been great. Our strength coach, Tyler, I didn't even say his name, Tyler Whitmer. He's our strength coach, director of sports performance for the Olympic side. He's awesome. And I lean on the coaches too, because they do trust the coaches. They know the coaches. The coaches know them. And so I had to ask for a lot of help saying, hey, such and such not doing great, or, he hasn't been coming in. I don't know where the disconnect is. I don't know him that well. I need some help here. And luckily I didn't have to have a ton of those conversations, and we were relatively healthy when I first got here. So I got lucky too. I mean, there's a little bit of that as well. I think I've been trying to learn more how to build trust. I think it's one of the most important things, especially with my job. Simon Sinek said, his definition is that trust is the biological belief that someone else has your best interests at heart. And it's biological, right? So it's like, it's serotonin, it's oxytocin, it's these chemicals that when you have an interaction, your brain makes you feel safe. And so trying to build those little connections that they know that they can trust me, that I can help them go to the NBA, or I can help them graduate, or I can help them be able to walk when they're on crutches right now. So another one that I've been kind of using is you have to be competent. This is John Maxwell, I think. You have to be competent in what you're doing, and it takes time as well. There's another part of it too. I should look it up, but he's got it's in 21 Laws of Leadership, I believe. A good definition as well. I've got it on my whiteboard at home. So I kind of try to use those to every time I remember. And when I realize somebody's kind of drifting away, like you kind of get that feeling like something's going on. It's probably between us. Try to go back to that and have an open conversation as best as you can. Like, hey, what's going on, man? Like, something's off here, I think. And sometimes that can help. And then pulling in coaches too, if you need some help keeping them accountable, although you also don't want to seem like kind of the tattletale, but sometimes that's just how it goes.
Yeah, that's definitely a hard line to kind of walk. I know, especially because you want to have their best interests in mind at the same time, but you don't want to breach that trust, especially when you're in the beginning stages of trying to develop a relationship, for sure. But I like what you talked about, like actually asking for help. There's a point in time, like even if you've been there 10 years as a full-time, or if it's your first week, there still comes a point in time where it's okay to ask for help from anybody, especially within the confines of a team. Like, everybody should be on the same page together. So there should be no reason or issue that you can't ask for someone for more help. And some players gravitate better to different coaches on staff, different support staff. And as long as they're in the right frame of mind and they're still pulling in the right direction, then like, who cares really who is the person that they're going to? Like, no one really needs to take credit for those things, as long as we're all like successful together. That's the big important thing.
Absolutely. Like that is a perfect example. I've had a couple guys with some chronic knee stuff, and for a little while there, it was one of our GA coaches because he went through something similar. He was a former player here, and we would talk about what he's doing. Like, hey, can I kind of just run him through like this, and it's safe, it's smart, and I think they'll get more benefit from that than they would for working with me, and I can spend a little more time with somebody else too. So everybody gets more benefit but the most important thing is having that conversation as the support staff, that you are pulling the same direction, that while you are sort of mixing jobs or helping each other out, that you're not being the athletic trainer, right? You're not being the coach. You have your roles, but you can help each other out in that way.
No, definitely. And sometimes, like you said too, using someone else that's been through the experience is definitely helpful, but also having like a different voice. Sometimes athletes perk up and just want to hear something different, even if it's the same exact thing you're saying. if it comes from someone different, that might be the thing that gets their point across. They
100%.
just, for whatever reason. Hey, so with your like training background, it's cool to see you still getting after it and setting some PRs, your own modest ones. I'll give them to you. Hey, but from your training background and your athletic background and kind of your outside knowledge of sports, like that you work with, like how do you end up like getting together and putting together a plan for a new sport? Obviously, you never played women's lacrosse, and it was cool when you came out, and like I can let you speak on it more, but I mean, I remember you talking with me and Queener and be like, hey, just like tell me how this game works, like what's going on. But like, how did you kind of take that same approach, or did you do it any differently when you started approaching basketball? Obviously, most people are a little bit more familiar with basketball but for an athletic trainer, like you have a training background yourself and you have an athletic background in sports in high school and playing recreationally and everything too. But when you go about learning a new sport for your professional career, like what's kind of your process to make sure that you kind of can get on the same page and relate to the guys, or learn cues and learn different plays or learn schemes and systems that again probably help with buy-in too?
Yeah, that's a good point. I think one thing that was actually really, really helpful when I first got to Fresno, the head coach would come over. We had early practice. It wasn't that early. I think we had to start at like 8 a.m. or maybe 7. She would come over early, show me the practice plan, draw out drills, and say, hey, here's what we're going to do. And I don't even remember if anybody was hurt. Like if she would ask, like, can they do that? Can they do that? I think she just came over and showed me the drills. And I was so thankful for that because yes, I don't know lacrosse. I knew the men's game a little bit, and I didn't know anything about the women's game because it's very different. And so her coming over, the head coach coming over and sitting in front of my desk at 6:30 in the morning, drawing out drills was so cool. Like it was very cool. And the other thing was, so the assistant coaches and you having a lacrosse background as well, everybody was so open about people not knowing lacrosse. I don't know if it was history of that job, the intern kind of having new ones every so often that you kind of have to teach somebody, or if it's just really the passion of growing the game of lacrosse. But everybody was so open to letting me ask questions, and I'd say, hey, this is kind of a dumb question. Why did that just happen? Or how come this can happen and that can't? How come why is that player running over and that player has to stop? And then how come we just blew a whistle? So it was really cool that I had people around me to help me learn the game. From my standpoint, it was helpful mostly to know personnel, who plays what position, who plays more often, who's younger, who's a freshman that's still getting into things. That's probably one of the most long-term, as you kind of, or through the season, that's probably one of the most important things to know, who's relatively new to this workload. But I definitely approached it differently when I got here. I don't have a lot of basketball experience as a professional, but I know the game. Shooting the hoop. Everybody knows that. But I didn't know who our players were. I didn't know who our starters were. I didn't really understand what kind of offense we ran. I didn't really understand basketball offense that much. Like I understand defense a little bit from playing hockey, like stay in front of them, whatever. But it's not the same. So I think being there every day and being attentive in what's going on and names is very helpful. And then we played a game. My first game was 2 days after I got here. So I realized who kind of plays more, who might be more likely to get hurt at a game and maybe need to get back sooner to play again. And so that was probably the way I approached it. And I kind of I try to stay a little low key, just kind of ask simple questions or just try to watch and observe. One thing that I'm learning is that the basketball world, in terms of coaching, everybody knows everybody, and people are dropping names of coaches, and I don't know any of them. And so sometimes I'd Google a name, like, oh, okay, I'm kind of catching on a little bit. Like we were just talking a little bit before the show, some former coaches and who's going where, because it's always happening. So I kind of felt left out of those conversations, which is fine because I have my own conversations about those anyways. So that's something I'm kind of learning, who the coaches are that have been around for a long time and who kind of bounces around sometimes and stuff like that. So it was definitely a different approach, especially since I didn't really have time like I did before. So I just had to jump right in. And at the end of the day, really, for me, if somebody's hurt, somebody's hurt. Like it's a human body, and you know that every athlete, for the most part, needs to run, cut, jump, sprint, and get them back to be able to do that. It's not. It doesn't have to be that complicated in
No,
terms of those more simple sports. Talk about wrestling and gymnastics. Okay, that's a little different, but for field sports and court sports, it's not. It doesn't have to be too complicated.
no, that's a great point. I mean, it was trial by fire when you got there too, just kind of learning everything on the fly. But yeah, you definitely did not have the opportunity to kind of sit back and really like watch and observe and kind of get a feel like at more of a comfortable rate. It was just all go, go, go. And but I like what you touched on every time you kind of talked about the sport, you always kind of drifted back towards like the personnel side, the personality of the athletes and everything too, because I mean, you could get caught up as a strength coach and just dictating programs and reciting things that you read out of a book. But if you get away from the people business and like how athletes are responding to it, like what's the stress that's actually going on in their life, when's the next game, like all those sort of things, then you're getting lost in the weeds with just nonsense. And the same with the athletic training side. I'm sure you can attest to it. The more you kind of just spew anatomy at them and this muscle does this and this, and you don't actually like ask how they feel and how they're responding or how they're dealing with an injury or life outside of like sport, like it can like weigh on them a lot when you're just only coming in and treating them like an auto body shop the whole time. So or do you have any other like advice for like maybe younger athletic trainers to kind of work on the personality side or find ways to make sure that they can develop their own kind of coaching voice as an athletic trainer to make sure that they don't get so heavy on the science side and can stay on the practical and the application side a lot more and keep it a people business?
Yeah, I think I've definitely said this before is anybody can write a program, whether it's a rehab program or a strength training program or any programming isn't that hard. But when you add people into it, whether it's the actual student athlete or whether it's other stakeholders, it makes it a lot more complicated. So your ability to deliver and explain and educate why is really important. And also what I'm learning from my coaches who are a lot older than me, I should about a lot, but they're older than me. They've been doing it longer than me. They've kind of told me like some of the student athletes today are different than they were before. Student athletes today, they need a little bit more background info. They need a little bit more understanding why and how come we're not doing this, how come we're not doing an injection versus we are doing an MRI or just an X-ray. Understanding that why is really important, and your ability to deliver that message at the same level they're at is pretty important. So it's just soft skills. I mean, it's just a little bit it's practice and some of it's messing up too, having a conversation that doesn't go that well. And I think sometimes I think about it where if they need to call their parent or they need to call their coach or some other family member or former coach, if they're going to call somebody and say, oh, what did your trainer say? What did your athletic trainer say? Oh, he said this, 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 and it's not even that close. Like, or they said this, 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 and it's like spot on, then I'm happy. But if they say, I don't really know what they said a lot of things, kind of with my knee, like, okay, didn't do a good job. So that's one thing I try to say is keep it 1 to 2 points that they can summarize and repeat back to somebody else what's going on. And if that person wants to get the full details and exactly what's going to happen, then they can call me with the patient's permission, of course.
Right. No, that's a good point because I think I hadn't even thought about that so much either. Like athletes actually talking to their parents and relaying information because there's a lot of things that you can't like from HIPAA standpoint and everything like actually go through and tell certain people. I don't know how it works with athletes, parents and stuff, but I mean, at the point in time they come in, they're 18. So it's up to the athlete what they choose to disclose, but they're going to be the middle person between you and their parents. And you hope that one, they're paying attention, but also you kind of have to educate them keep it brief and make sure they understand everything you're saying, because they're going to pass that information on to their parents too. And then you have to deal with them, like in terms of insurance and all those sort of things that I am so lucky I don't have to touch with a 10-foot pole, but it makes your job a lot easier. And I know those parents and those athletes are a lot more appreciative when it's someone that actually cares about them and actually explains what's going on with them and cares about them more than just what injury they're actually occurring or what insurance they take. So
it
those
means
are
a
good
lot
points.
when a parent tells you that either somebody had an injury or maybe they have a chronic medical condition or disease or something that you help manage while they're gone, and you catch them at a game or at a event or something and say, hey, thank you for taking care of my son or daughter while they're at school. Like I'm just want to say thank you. Like that means a lot to me, and just as much as a student athlete saying thank you for what we do for them, which is huge for me too. I don't have kids myself, but I try to imagine what it would be like if I had a kid and sent them off somewhere and I know they're hurt or I know they're having surgery and I can't do anything about it. It's got to be frustrating. So I try to have that sort of empathy for what those parents are going through, and that way I take extra care of their kid, make sure they say, hey, and anytime somebody gets hurt too, say, hey, have you talked to the parents? Do you want me to help answer any questions they might have that you're having trouble answering, or what are you comfortable with me doing? Make sure that things at home are going well too.
No, that's a great point. Yeah, those are things sometimes I just don't think about, because when I see the parents, it's like, hey, thanks for taking care of them, like getting them stronger or like joking or whatever it is. Like, but for your side of it, sometimes, like, I know we've had a few athletes. We've had one in particular that basically never saw the field for their entire career. So I know the relationship that you had with her is different than mine. Like mine was always trying to get her back and try to keep her positive, and yours was like surgery after surgery and constantly talking to the parents and trying to make sure that everything's going well. And that's 4 almost agonizing years of trying to get back and kind of 2 steps forward, 4 steps back at times. So I can only imagine like the relationship that you kind of built between constant rehabs, going back and forth with the parents for some of those.
That was an interesting one, and it still is. I mean, it's I think talking about relationships, it's in school they taught me, hey, make sure you build a relationship before somebody gets hurt. Like, okay, well, thanks. Good idea. I mean, it's true, but once somebody has to go through a rehab and or post-surgical rehabilitation, and you see them every day, your relationship has changed, and it's changed forever after that. So then compound that by 5, I think, and it's like kind of a special thing. I wasn't there for all of it, but a good portion of it, and it sucks for sure. It's not easy. It's not easy for me. It wasn't easy for me. It wasn't easy for our surgeons. It wasn't easy for her, and I'm sure not easy for her family. But I like to think that I hopefully had a positive impact on a pretty tough experience.
Yeah, no doubt. Hey, kind of switching subjects a little bit, going forward, like I know you, like you're saying, trying to lead by example and be a positive role model for the athletes, and kind of be and show some empathy when you're actually talking to them, and how the parents would feel about treating and taking care of their kids basically when they're gone at college, especially with our team, like when you were here, thousands of miles away for some of them. So how do you kind of try to set a good example with the student athletes? Like, I know you said you were trying to stay active and train and do things. Like, are there any other things that like athletic trainers can do to kind of be a positive example, either mentor athletes or just kind of practice what they preach in some way? It's a little different for strength coaches because they just want to like understand that, hey, if you're going to tell me that I have to eat vegetables, you better be eating vegetables. You better be training. You better doing these things. As an athletic trainer, like the dynamic is a little bit different. So how do you feel athletic trainers would do a good job of trying to like put their best foot forward and be the good example for their student athletes?
That's a pretty good question, because sometimes I don't do that. I do as I say, but not as I do.
We're not robots, so sometimes
Well,
it
I
has
think
to slip through the cracks.
yeah, I think that's part of it too. Like say, hey, like I want to take care of myself. I don't do every single little thing, and I don't expect you to also. But if you want to be elite, that is what it takes. I do know what it takes, and um, I think I think it depends on what your message is. Like if your message is health and wellness and mental health, then I think you have to have that be part of your life. And I think also you, just like we just said, you have to be open about what you struggle with too. Like I'm the quote unquote hard gainer, right? So I have trouble putting on muscle mass, lean mass. And I tell people, I tell guys that, like, hey, look, I kind of joke around and say, well, I'm getting in there, getting after it. And yeah, I have trouble putting weight on, but what really works for me is being consistent about eating or when I was, I said, when I was counting calories and make sure I was getting all my food in, I did really well. Like that kind of stuff helped with me and not overstepping too. So I've never had a problem being overweight. So I can't really have that perspective to offer to somebody, maybe an athlete that's trying to lose a little bit of body fat. Yeah, I think it's just walking your talk, but still letting them know what you struggle with is the same maybe as what they struggle with.
No, that's a great point. That's actually showing that you're human, like we kind of talked about. Like you can't always be very robotic and always be doing those things, because it might look really cool, but if athletes see you slip up for whatever reason, like you might as well just be honest with them the whole way through. I mean, we can't just always constantly be practicing what you preach, but we all make mistakes, and like you said, kind of owning up to them or showing example of this is kind of the things that I struggle with. I mean, you can probably relate to some of your players that are having those same issues. And then I think with experience, like comes more knowledge and like wisdom, to the point where maybe you're not going to be able to go through every single story, or I can relate to people that really had like back injuries because that's what I went through. You're not going to be able to have every single one of those stories, but
Hopefully.
I think over time, yeah. Well, over time, you have athletes that have gone through it, so you can anecdotally tell them too, like these are what this person experienced. These are kind of how we mitigated those issues. Like if you like put this much effort into it, then you can have the same goals that you're striving to. It might just take a little bit more work. So I think those are great things to have in your back pocket. But if you're leading by example, and if you're at least trying to do your best effort and struggle at something and set goals for yourself, then I think it definitely helps, especially with the athletes, because it looks a little bit different when they're going through all the hard things day in and day out in practice, and they have to go to school, and kind of we look like we're coasting and just kind of delegating and dictating what they're supposed to do. But when they get to see you actually struggle through something, or like you're lugging bags during travel and throwing them on airplanes and having to tape guys up in 5 minutes because of game time switch or something, like I think they build a lot, you build a lot more respect a lot quicker when they see you do those things too.
I think you're spot on, and I think I was about to say that, like, take your job serious, be a professional, to approach it as a professional, show up on time, don't look like you just rolled out of bed. You know, I try to dress somewhat decent. Kind of like I'm gonna go play golf. Like look kind of nice, take it serious, and just like you said, grab bags on the bus. Don't make people carry bags. Like grab bags for them. Do that little stuff, knowing that an athlete's like, hey, I have an interview, then I have to do this. Like understand that they have other needs too. So
no, that's a great point. Hey, so continuing education wise, like what do you kind of do to improve and like sharpen the sword? Do you have any like favorite resources or people you lean on or follow? Like what kind of recommendations would you give to anybody looking to get into athletic training to kind of brush up on?
Well, if you have an interest in sports medicine or athletic training, I think, especially if you're a student, like high school student, college student that maybe is interested in, or maybe in a career change, reach out to somebody that has a job that you want to do. I know I don't know a single athletic trainer or anybody that has turned down a student shadowing. And I think that is the best way to know if it's a job that you are interested in doing or not. So shadowing, I always encourage people to shadow. And I'm glad that I think for Katie requirements for certifications that you have to do shadowing hours in order to apply to programs for athletic training, which I think is really important because that weeds out a lot of people that don't realize what it is that we do, and turns out they're not interested before they spend a lot of money on a degree that they don't want to use. So, so in terms of that, continue or starting your education, I guess I think is most important. But continuing education, you can take your classes, go to the conferences. We have to get continuing education credits just like CSCS and the rest of those certs. But I actually one of the PhD students was an athletic trainer, or still is, but is now doing his PhD. He came over and said, "Hey, how come we don't have a journal club? Like, how come we don't? Like, I know our physicians over there have them, but it's more like doctor talk. Like, it's not really what we do every day." So I started one. So we have a journal club, and it was over quarantine. It was pretty nice. I'd pick something and just kind of be able to flex that muscle because I didn't get a lot of clinical experience. I didn't do an injury evaluation for probably like 6 months, which is the longest I've ever gone since I was a student. So it's nice to be able to kind of keep those skills sharp, or at least keep the vocabulary in your brain. So we invite our doctors, our strength coaches, athletic trainers, and our physical therapists at our doctor's practice to come just talk shop. And it's very low key. We usually go get beers across the street. Over quarantine, we did it all over Zoom, which we got to be a lot, but it's just good to get other people's perspective and learn a little bit about what a surgery does. And the physicians seem to really like it because they learn more about what strength coaches do. That to me is the biggest, I think, connection that's been made through that. And I think they have a better appreciation for how smart strength coaches are too, because some of the physicians, maybe their only experience with strength coaches was when they were a student athlete back in like the 80s or what they see on TV, and they just don't know, almost like the general public. So bringing those two areas together, which is really important, has been pretty good. I think when a strength coach understands who the physician is, that they've met them before, there's a face behind the surgeon, and hey, here's a protocol that so-and-so put up, and that's what we got to follow. And they're like, oh, okay, yeah, it makes sense because that person, they were smart. They acknowledged who I was, what I do, and what value I add. But in other terms too, it's just good to keep up on some of those articles and talk about new trends. Sometimes I'll use like a video from Mike Reinold or just another kind of topic, and I just let it flow, like ask a couple questions here and there and see what everybody's got to say. So that's been kind of the most way. I don't get continuing education credits, or I should probably start applying for them. But that's been kind of the most fun, really.
No, that's really cool. That kind of goes back to some of the things we were talking about in the beginning about bridging the gap between the departments, and seeing you actually lump in the doctors too is awesome. Because I forget what it was. It was a study a while back. I don't even know where I heard it, but it was a study where they put pictures next to surgeries. So like the surgery, I think it was MRIs. It was MRIs. So they put pictures next to the MRIs. So when the radiologist went in there to read it, they were more likely to actually, the percentage of it actually being accurate was like substantially increased. So the same thing you said, like strength coaches and athletic trainers. Well, you guys already deal with doctors, but for a strength coach to put a face with a name with a doctor and feel more comfortable with the protocol that they put in place, especially like with my throwers, that like for the pitchers that actually end up getting like Tommy John's or something, and it's an extended recovery, and we have a throwing protocol that takes forever, and we got guys progressing that are taking too long or too little amount of time. Like to know who they are and to put a face with a name and understand the procedure that went in place and kind of knock ideas back and forth. So one, they feel more comfortable with me and I feel more comfortable with them. Then again, the only person that really benefits besides us really at the end of the day is the athletes. So that's definitely a cool thing that kind of feeds into the communication and building, like seeing how you're building trust and a rapport with more than just the athletes, just the whole department in general.
100%. And it can be frustrating as an athletic trainer that has to get those hard questions from coaches like, well, this was a 6-month thing. How come it's 7 months? How come it's 8 months? And why are we waiting? Like, what does it mean to get cleared? What is clear? Like, oh, they're cleared for that. Well, what does that even mean? I mean, it's nice when, a lot of it is from in this scenario, is from the physician wanting to spend a little extra time to know who these people are and take the extra time. We have an awesome group of physicians at Idaho Sports Medicine Institute that have been around a long time and are really, really great advocates, one, for what athletic trainers do, and then also because we work with them so close, but also the rest of the support staff, including strength coaches, nutritionists, dietitians, mental health providers. It's pretty cool here. To sum it up, it's pretty cool.
That's awesome. Hey, so like, I got to follow up with it for that, like the journal club too. So how important do you think for athletic trainers or any like profession involved in the collegiate sector or sports performance in general, how important is it to have a knowledge base and even appreciation in more fields than just the one you work with?
I think somebody explained, like I did get my CSCS. Somebody explained it like, well, now you can speak their language. Like rate of force development was something I'd never heard of until I studied for the CSCS exam. Understanding some of the Olympic lift progressions and where you might start, how you might teach it. Like there's different top down, bottom up. Speaking the language helps. I think I wanted to bring up this story. I don't know if it fits now, but one of the first conversations that you and I had, I had to make a modification for somebody. Again, I didn't know them very well. I was brand new. It was over the summer. And I came in and I said, hey, so she can't really do this motion right here. And you were like, you can talk to me like you can use anatomical terms and like planes of motion. I was like, oh, okay, great. That makes it a lot easier then. So she can't do end range flexion, can't do this. So what can we do to help her train? So speaking the language is important, understanding and sometimes being able to translate too. So if a surgeon's talking to maybe to a strength coach and they're kind of, the languages aren't really matching up, you're able to kind of decipher and translate and know what everybody's talking about. It's probably the same thing. Everybody's talking about the same thing. But it's also important, I think, to not overstep. I think, especially on the coaching side, for the sports side, I know some about basketball now, but when we're at practice in the gym, I can guarantee you that I know the least about basketball as everybody else in the gym. Guaranteed. So that's not my spot. I mean, I let them do their thing. I say, hey, we should probably take half reps here, or this person's struggling with this, might want to take, and the coaches do a great job of modifying as they go. So basketball, I let them handle it. Don't overstep.
I like it. Those are great points, to actually be able to speak the language so that at least you can have a seat at the table and be involved in the conversation. I mean, for you, it might be just Googling more basketball names when they bring it up. That's all you got to know.
Yeah.
Just pick and roll, triangle offense, just yada, yada. You'll get them all pretty quick. Hey, but I like that too. And like, once you actually do have a seat at the table and you're able to speak the language and maybe kind of be a mediator between, like for you, for doctors to strength coaches, or from doctors to sport coaches, stuff like that, to still make sure that sometimes you suggest things, but you still stay in your own lane. I think that's where both of our professions in the past have definitely like had bad blood with each other, where athletic trainers are just like, hey, no lower body. It was like, he's got turf toe. Like, what do you mean? That's it. So, and then the same thing with the strength coaches, like athletic trainers got very concerned about giving them anything because strength coaches were like, oh, you said he was healthy. It was like, well, not to just throw 600 pounds on him for no reason. So it's being able to kind of speak each other's language and have conversations with each other and open up the dialogue like that. That's all that really needs to be done. And it's constant. It constantly needs to happen. And it's not just a one and done sort of thing. If it's not open and it's not a two-way street where we're going back and forth constantly, then that's when the issues are going to come up. So that was great. Two great points.
I'm not looking for a new job, but if I was going on an interview, or the strength coach for that sport is my number one I mean, more than the head coach, more than position coaches. I need to meet the strength coach. Like that's the most important thing to me. And probably a team position, supervisor, but you travel with them, like it's important.
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, all the teams that I've traveled with, if I'm not staying with one of the assistants, it's always been with the athletic trainer. Like my previous job, like traveling with my men's soccer team, me and the athletic trainer, we would do everything. Like we set it up into a boot room. We had the DOS boots, the recovery boots going on. We had all the snacks. We had the recovery shakes. We'd open the door wide open. We'd have a sauna in the bathroom. We traveled heavy.
Yeah.
Like, and it was fun, and it made our jobs both a lot easier and a lot more enjoyable too. When someone would come in too with an injury and they're not trying to hide it from me, I'm not trying to hide the extra work someone else is doing from him. So it just made it easier where we both could kind of bounce back and forth. If I was done with him, all right, now you can go on to Zach and work with the athletic trainers, and Zach could pass them on to me like after they were good to go. So it definitely makes the job a lot easier. And that's one thing I know when I look to talk for other positions, and when I've talked with these positions coming up, that was one of the things that I needed to really have a conversation with was what's the consensus on the team? Like, what's the pulse? Like, what's your process with return to play? All those sort of things. Those are huge.
Yeah, and the hard part is that there's things that have to be hard and fast, set in stone. You cannot do this medically. You cannot do it. So, like you got to stick to your guns a little bit as an athletic trainer. When people push, you have a good relationship and say, "Hey, we could do this, but we can absolutely not do that." That's out of the question. But you got to have that relationship to be able to either make concessions or modifications or explain why. And that person, the strength coach, like we're talking, sport performance coach, will trust you and understand that you're doing the right thing.
No doubt. Hey, so we come to the end of the show, and like any good training session, we've got a finisher for you. So 4 quarters, 4 questions. And since every single NHL game is going into overtime and my Caps are going to come out on top and the Avs have no chance. Actually, they're probably going to win the whole thing.
Let's go.
We're going into overtime for the end. So you could take as long as you want, or you can go rapid fire with these. But you ready?
Let's bring it on.
All right. So first one I got for you, biggest influence in the sports medicine field and favorite athlete growing up.
Oh, okay. Biggest influence, probably. So that mentor, I was talking about Doug Kretzinger, Angie Beisner at Ohio State. Jeff Dietz, Vince O'Brien, lots of people have helped me. What was a favorite athlete? Oh, I was a huge fan of Rob Blake, Colorado Avalanche. Big slap shot from the point. He finished his career, I think, with the Kings. I think he's still in the Kings organization. I think he was probably my favorite. Yeah.
Mine was Patrick Waugh. I did a project. I did a project on him back in the day. He was the man.
Wild.
Hey, so what can you be found doing when you're not in the athletic training room or courtside? What are some of your go-to hobbies?
Hobbies. So I've been getting into woodworking a little bit. Backpacking for sure is definitely one of my mental health kind of de-stress. What's something that I need to try to get out. One of my goals is enjoy nature once a month, so it can be kind of different things. Going to breweries, trying beers, hanging out with friends. There's lots of beer here, so I'm still making my way around.
There you go. Hey, so if you weren't in athletic training, what do you think you would be doing as a career? And if you could go pro in any sport, what would it be?
Oh, what would my career be? Probably, I don't want to say finance, but like, I'd probably be a manager of some kind, maybe assistant to the regional manager or something like that. Sales doesn't really strike me as my forte. What was the second question?
If you could go pro in any sport.
Okay, either golf or volleyball. So I have a similar thing. Like if you could get a scholarship and play for any sport in high level division, what would it be? I think for me, men's volleyball is number one for sure. Like everybody seems so like relaxed. Everybody's from California. Like it's all good. Not too intense, but just enough to have fun. Yeah, that'd be me.
All right. Didn't see that one coming. Hey, so if you could set up an ideal training day it might be different if you're backpacking, but what's your, actually, when you hit your 225, what's your ideal training PR song or music? And what was your post-training meal?
Oh yeah. So the music to me is not that important as long as it's loud and like fast. So it could be like EDM, dance, electro, or like Five Finger Death Punch. Like I'm good with pretty much your classic rock as long as it's kind of loud. I don't even remember what it was that day. So yeah, I'm not picky by any means. And then I don't remember what I ate, but barbecue for sure is up there. Just crush like some brisket or like pulled pork sandwich. And I like breakfast foods too, so like an omelet or something like that. That sounds pretty good right now, actually.
It does.
I haven't trained today, but I might eat it anyways.
Hey, treat yourself, man.
Yeah.
Last one I got for you for overtime. So what's your most valuable piece of advice you've received? And if you want to share, from who?
It's kind of, all the time. One thing that really sticks out for some reason, and it's a really like kind of, it's not like life advice necessarily, although Dr. John McMillan is full of wisdom. So reach out to him at Fresno State. He's in the kinesis department. But one of them was from Jeff Dietz. He works for the Memphis Grizzlies now, but at Ohio State. He was showing us when you do an ultrasound, when you do a therapeutic ultrasound, go in circles. That's how you do it, whatever. But he said, go slow. If you go slow, it means it gives a little bit of buy-in, like makes them think you're actually doing something really therapeutic. It tends to go better, takes your job seriously. And I was like, wow, what a great little tip. Just go slow. You don't have to go fast, just go slow.
All right, man. I like it.
Yeah.
No, that's awesome. That's great advice too. I think we, especially young in our careers, we try to do everything real fast. So take a step back. Maybe in your next life, when you're a college Division I men's volleyball player, you can be real chill, playing out on the West Coast again. So you could take it real slow that way.
Absolutely.
Hey, so for those listening and everything, how can people follow you and hear more stuff about what Adam Yetter's got going on, or maybe start their own journal club? Like, where can people follow you, get a hold of you if they have any more follow-up questions?
Yeah, if you happen to be interested, you can email me, adamyetter@boisestate.edu, or I'm on Twitter as well. I think it's Adam Yetter or Adam-Yetter or something like that. Those are really probably the best ways to get a hold of me. I find a lot of my articles on Twitter, so I'll follow either people that put out content that I think is interesting. Alan Bishop does a lot out of Houston. Mike Reinold in Boston, Lenny Macrina. I like all their stuff, or at least I like talking about it. And then some of those article or journals, they have Twitter accounts, so they'll put the headline out what the article is, and I'll favorite it. And I've got this kind of list that I can kind of pick things out and read if I have extra time. So
nice.
Yeah, follow me on Twitter.
Right on. Hey, I'll tag you on all the stuff so that people can follow you and make sure that they can catch up on all those journals. But
Perfect.
Hey, I appreciate you coming on today, man. Like I said, I wish you were still in the red and blue, but I'm happy for you being up at Boise and enjoying yourself. So it's cool to see you kind of move on with your career and doing big things. And I appreciate you coming on today and sharing with everybody.
Yeah, absolutely. I've followed along. I've listened to all of or part of almost all of your episodes now. I didn't listen to the most recent one, but it's all been good stuff. It's pretty cool that you're doing this, and you have a large network of people, and lots of people are willing to talk about what they've done, and some of the athletic trainers that came on before me, some pretty interesting stuff. So thanks for doing this, and thanks for having me.
I appreciate you, man. I mean, you're part of the network now too, so we're gonna keep you locked in for it.
Deal. I'm in.
Awesome, man. Well, take care, bud.
Later.
That's it for this episode of The Strength Game. Thank you again to this week's guest and to our sponsors, Cerberus Strength. Be sure to connect and keep up with our guests at the links in the description below. Remember to subscribe to us on Apple and Google Podcasts, Spotify, or your favorite podcast provider to stay up to date on all future episodes. Also, check us out on YouTube and CoachO'Brien.com, where you can find all the video versions of these episodes, as well as show notes, episode schedule, and much more. comments, ratings, and reviews are always welcome and appreciated. Thanks again for tuning in, and be sure to join us next week for another great episode of The Strength Game.